In a significant legal development, the United States Supreme Court has declined to review the civil verdict against President Donald Trump in the case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll, effectively ending his appellate options and cementing an $88 million judgment against the sitting president. The court's decision, rendered in November 2025 without comment or noted dissents, represents the culmination of a years-long legal battle that began when Carroll publicly accused Trump of sexual assault in 2019. The case has moved through multiple courts, two jury trials, and numerous appeals, establishing a judicial record that now stands as a matter of settled law. Carroll, a longtime advice columnist and author, alleged that Trump sexually assaulted her in a Bergdorf Goodman department store dressing room in Manhattan during the mid-1990s. She claimed that Trump forced himself upon her, penetrating her with his fingers before she managed to escape. When Carroll went public with her account decades later, Trump responded by categorically denying the incident, stating he had never met her, despite photographic evidence to the contrary, and dismissing her as not his type. These statements, along with subsequent denials, formed the basis for Carroll's defamation claims. The first trial, held in 2023, resulted in a jury finding Trump liable for sexual abuse under New York law and defamation. While the jury did not find sufficient evidence to support a rape claim specifically, they determined that Carroll's account of sexual abuse was credible and that Trump's denials constituted defamation. The jury awarded $5 million in damages. Rather than accepting the verdict, Trump immediately resumed his attacks on Carroll's credibility, calling her a liar and characterizing the verdict as unjust. These post-verdict statements prompted Carroll to file a second lawsuit, which resulted in an additional $83 million in damages, substantially composed of punitive damages intended to deter further defamation. The combined $88 million judgment now stands as one of the largest civil penalties ever assessed against a sitting or former president. Trump's legal team pursued multiple avenues of appeal following the initial verdict. They argued before the federal appeals court that the trial judge had committed significant errors, particularly regarding the admission of evidence. Central to their argument was the contention that the Access Hollywood tape, a 2016 recording in which Trump boasted about grabbing women without consent, should have been excluded as prejudicial character evidence rather than admitted as relevant proof of behavior patterns. The defense also emphasized what they characterized as a complete absence of corroborating evidence. They noted that no eyewitnesses came forward, no surveillance footage surfaced, no police report was filed at the time of the alleged incident, and no medical examination was conducted. Trump's attorneys argued that in the absence of physical evidence, Carroll's testimony alone could not meet the preponderance of evidence standard required in civil litigation. The federal appeals court rejected these arguments in their entirety. In upholding the $5 million verdict, the panel ruled that the Access Hollywood tape was properly admitted not as prohibited character evidence, but as probative proof of Trump's modus operandi regarding women. The court found that Trump's own words on the recording, describing behavior strikingly similar to Carroll's allegations, directly supported the credibility of her account. Furthermore, the appeals court affirmed that Carroll's testimony, combined with testimony from two friends whom she had told about the assault shortly after it occurred, constituted sufficient evidence for a reasonable jury to find liability. The court emphasized that credibility determinations fall within the jury's exclusive province and are not subject to second-guessing by appellate courts. When Trump's legal team sought en banc review, requesting that the full complement of appeals court judges reconsider the three-judge panel's decision, that request was denied without comment. This denial left the Supreme Court as Trump's final judicial recourse, setting the stage for the November 2025 petition that would ultimately be declined. The Supreme Court receives approximately 7,000 to 8,000 petitions for certiorari annually, granting full review in roughly 80 cases. The overwhelming majority of petitions are denied without explanation, a standard practice that does not constitute endorsement or rejection of the lower court's reasoning, but simply indicates the court's determination that the case does not warrant its attention. Trump's petition fell into this broad category of denials, receiving no noted dissents or indications that any justice believed the case merited review. The practical effect of the denial is unequivocal. The $88 million judgment is now final and enforceable. Trump has exhausted his appellate rights within the federal judicial system and must now satisfy the judgment or face enforcement proceedings. This represents a rare instance of a sitting president being held personally liable for conduct predating his presidency, with all available legal challenges definitively resolved against him. Legal scholars note that the Supreme Court's silence on the matter speaks volumes. In an era of heightened judicial politicization, the court's refusal to intervene in a case involving a president who appointed three of its sitting members suggests that the legal issues presented were not sufficiently complex or consequential to warrant the court's limited docket. The absence of any recorded dissent indicates that even the conservative justices Trump elevated to the bench saw no compelling reason to disturb the lower court's handling of the matter. The Carroll case now joins a growing list of legal setbacks for Trump at the nation's highest court. Earlier in 2025, the court rejected his attempt to block sentencing in the New York hush money criminal case, in which he had been convicted on 34 felony counts related to falsifying business records. Trump had argued that sentencing would interfere with presidential duties, but the court found that the conditional discharge imposed by the trial judge would have minimal impact on executive functions. The Supreme Court's refusal to hear Trump's Carroll appeal carries substantial legal and financial ramifications that extend far beyond the immediate parties to the litigation. Legal analysts emphasize that the judgment's finality establishes important precedents regarding presidential accountability and the admissibility of evidence in civil cases involving allegations of sexual misconduct. The evidentiary rulings upheld by the appellate courts, and now left undisturbed by the Supreme Court, address significant questions about how prior statements by defendants may be used in subsequent litigation. The Access Hollywood tape, recorded in 2005 and publicly released during the 2016 presidential campaign, nearly derailed Trump's candidacy at the time. Its admission in the Carroll trial represented a strategic victory for Carroll's legal team, who successfully argued that Trump's own words describing behavior consistent with Carroll's allegations were directly relevant to determining whether the alleged assault occurred. Trump's attorneys had contended that the tape constituted impermissible propensity evidence, material designed to show that Trump had a general tendency toward sexual misconduct, rather than proof of what specifically transpired in the Bergdorf-Goodman dressing room. Under federal evidence rules, propensity evidence is generally excluded because of its potential to prejudice jurors against defendants based on unrelated conduct. However, exceptions exist for evidence demonstrating motive, opportunity, intent, preparation, plan, knowledge, identity, or absence of mistake or accident. The appeals court determined that the tape fell within these exceptions, characterizing it as evidence of Trump's approach to women rather than mere character assassination. This distinction between using prior acts to prove propensity versus using them to establish a pattern of behavior represents a nuanced but crucial element of evidence law. The Supreme Court's decision not to review this determination leaves the appeals court's interpretation intact as binding precedent within the Second Circuit, potentially influencing how similar evidence is treated in future civil cases involving allegations of sexual assault. The financial implications of the $88 million judgment are equally significant. While Trump has long claimed billionaire status, financial analysts and investigative journalists have consistently questioned the liquidity of his wealth. Much of Trump's fortune appears tied to real estate holdings, branding agreements, and other illiquid assets that cannot be readily converted to cash. The judgment comes due at a particularly challenging moment, with Trump's political operation reportedly facing financial constraints and the former president potentially self-funding campaign activities. Satisfying an $88 million judgment presents several practical challenges. Trump may attempt to post a supersedes bond to stay enforcement pending further legal maneuvers, though the window for such actions narrows considerably following the Supreme Court's denial. Alternatively, he might seek to negotiate a settlement with Carroll's legal team for a reduced amount, though Carroll has given no public indication of willingness to accept less than the full judgment. Should enforcement proceedings commence, Carroll's attorneys could pursue asset discovery to identify bank accounts, properties, and revenue streams available for satisfaction of the debt. The timing of the financial obligation intersects problematically with Trump's other substantial legal expenditures. Multiple ongoing cases, including criminal matters and civil litigation, generate significant attorney fees and related costs. Additionally, the Internal Revenue Service has pursued claims regarding allegedly undervalued properties and unpaid taxes, potentially exposing Trump to billions in additional liabilities. The cumulative financial pressure represents an unprecedented situation for a sitting or former president, whose personal wealth is simultaneously supporting legal defenses, political operations, and now a substantial civil judgment. Political finance experts note that the judgment raises novel questions about whether political contributions could theoretically be used to satisfy personal legal obligations, though such use would likely trigger intense scrutiny under campaign finance regulations. More practically, the judgment may constrain Trump's ability to deploy personal resources for political purposes, potentially affecting campaign strategy and organizational capacity as the 2026 midterm elections approach. The judgment also carries implications for Trump's business interests. Creditors and business partners may reassess their relationships with Trump given the confirmed liability, potentially affecting access to capital, insurance coverage, and commercial opportunities. While Trump has historically demonstrated resilience in maintaining business relationships despite legal controversies, an $88 million judgment represents a concrete financial obligation that cannot be dismissed as mere allegation or political persecution. From a broader legal perspective, the case illustrates the viability of civil litigation as a mechanism for addressing historical allegations of sexual misconduct when criminal prosecution is barred by statutes of limitations. New York's Adult Survivors Act, which temporarily lifted the statute of limitations for certain sexual abuse claims, enabled Carroll to bring her case decades after the alleged incident. The successful outcome demonstrates that civil remedies remain available even when criminal accountability is foreclosed, providing a pathway for survivors to seek judicial validation and financial compensation. The punitive damages component, $83 million of the total $88 million, serves both compensatory and deterrent functions. The substantial award reflects the jury's determination that Trump's conduct warranted significant punishment beyond mere compensation for Carroll's reputational and emotional harms. The size of the award also signals to defendants generally that continued defamation of successful plaintiffs may result in exponentially increased liability, potentially influencing how public figures respond to adverse verdicts in the future. The Supreme Court's resolution of the Carroll litigation occurs within a complex political landscape that continues to evolve as the 2026 midterm elections approach. The judgment's finality removes a significant variable from Trump's legal portfolio, though its political implications remain subject to ongoing interpretation and strategic deployment by both supporters and opponents. For Trump's political base, the Carroll verdict and subsequent Supreme Court action likely reinforce existing narratives rather than altering fundamental perspectives. Supporters who have accepted Trump's characterization of the legal system as politically weaponized will likely interpret the Supreme Court's denial as further evidence of institutional corruption rather than judicial validation of the underlying verdict. This interpretive framework, where adverse legal outcomes confirm rather than refute claims of persecution, has proven remarkably durable throughout Trump's political career. However, the Supreme Court's composition complicates this narrative in ways that previous losses in lower courts or jurisdictions perceived as politically hostile did not. The current court maintains a 6-3 conservative majority, including 3 justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, appointed by Trump himself. The absence of any recorded dissent from these justices or from other conservative members of the court undermines claims that ideological bias drove the outcome. Legal observers note that had even one conservative justice indicated interest in hearing the case, it might have provided fodder for claims that the legal merits warranted further review. The unanimous silence suggests that the legal issues presented were sufficiently straightforward that even Trump's judicial appointees saw no basis for intervention. This dynamic presents strategic challenges for Trump's political messaging. The persecution narrative relies heavily on the claim that politically motivated actors within the justice system are unfairly targeting Trump because of his political threat to established interests. When the highest court in the land, staffed by judges Trump selected specifically for their conservative judicial philosophy, declines to provide relief, the argument that the system is rigged against him becomes more difficult to sustain for audiences beyond the committed base. For political opponents, the Carroll verdict's finality provides a powerful, legally validated line of attack. Unlike allegations that remain contested or unproven, the Carroll judgment represents a formal legal determination made by multiple juries and upheld through multiple levels of appellate review. Democrats can accurately state that a jury found Trump liable for sexual abuse, that appellate courts affirmed this finding, and that the Supreme Court declined to disturb it. This factual foundation enables messaging that transcends partisan accusation and rests on documented legal outcomes. The specific finding that Trump committed sexual abuse as defined by New York law, though not rape, carries particular resonance in electoral contexts. Campaign strategists recognize that allegations of sexual misconduct have historically influenced voter behavior, particularly among women voters and suburban moderates who may be persuadable in swing districts. The judicial determination provides a concrete basis for advertising and messaging that might otherwise risk appearing as mere political attack. Comparisons to previous presidential legal controversies highlight the unprecedented nature of the Carroll judgment. Richard Nixon resigned before facing formal impeachment proceedings related to the Watergate scandal. Bill Clinton was impeached for perjury and obstruction of justice stemming from a consensual sexual relationship, not for sexual assault. No modern president has faced a civil judgment finding liability for sexual abuse affirmed through the entire appellate process. This historical uniqueness presents both risks and opportunities for Trump's political positioning him as a singular figure who has survived controversies that would have ended other political careers, while simultaneously providing opponents with a historically grounded argument about fitness for office. The judgment also intersects with broader cultural conversations regarding accountability for sexual misconduct. The Me Too movement has elevated public awareness of sexual harassment and assault, while also generating complex debates about due process, evidentiary standards, and the appropriate scope of accountability. The Carroll case navigated these tensions through formal legal processes, with multiple juries hearing evidence, evaluating credibility, and reaching determinations under established burdens of proof. The appellate affirmations and Supreme Court denial suggest that these processes functioned as designed, producing outcomes that survived rigorous review. For survivors of sexual violence, Carroll's persistence in pursuing her case through to final judgment carries symbolic significance beyond the financial outcome. The litigation demonstrated that even powerful individuals with substantial resources can be held accountable through civil legal processes, and that historical allegations can be successfully adjudicated despite the absence of physical evidence or contemporaneous reporting. The multiple jury verdicts and appellate affirmations validate Carroll's decision to come forward and endure years of public scrutiny and personal attacks. The case also illustrates the limitations of legal accountability in addressing historical harm. The judgment cannot undo the alleged assault or its lasting effects on Carroll. The financial compensation, while substantial, represents a civil remedy rather than criminal punishment. Trump faces no incarceration, no sex offender registration, no criminal record, only a civil judgment that he may satisfy through financial means that, while burdensome, do not approach the severity of criminal sanctions. This limitation reflects the constraints of civil litigation and the expiration of criminal statutes of limitations, rather than any deficiency in the judicial process itself. As the political calendar advances toward the 2026 midterms, the Carroll judgment will likely feature prominently in campaign discourse. How effectively each party deploys this material and how persuadable voters interpret its significance will contribute to shaping electoral outcomes in competitive races. What remains legally settled is now becoming politically contested, as the formal conclusion of litigation gives way to the ongoing competition for public meaning and electoral consequence. The Supreme Court's role in this denouement merits final reflection. By declining certiorari, the Court exercised its discretionary authority in a manner consistent with decades of practice regarding cases that do not present novel legal questions or circuit splits requiring resolution. The decision reflects institutional restraint rather than political calculation, a determination that the federal judiciary's resources are better allocated to matters of broader legal significance than to reviewing a fact-specific application of established evidence rules in a civil damages case. For a court frequently criticized as politicized, the Carroll denial offers a counterexample of judicial independence. The justices Trump appointed did not recuse themselves, nor did they indicate any special solicitude for the president who elevated them. They participated in the court's ordinary processes and reached the same conclusion as their colleagues, that this case did not warrant the court's attention. This institutional behavior, however routine in historical context, carries weight in an era of intense scrutiny regarding the court's legitimacy and independence. The Carroll litigation thus concludes not with dramatic judicial pronouncement, but with the quiet administrative act of a certiorari denial, an unremarkable procedural outcome that nonetheless resolves one of the most remarkable legal sagas in American presidential history. The $88 million judgment stands. The findings of sexual abuse and defamation remain judicially established facts, and the political system must now determine what significance, if any, to assign these legal conclusions as the nation continues its ongoing experiment in self-governance.